All right, I want to get you back now to the House floor, where it appears Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan again falls short of votes needed to become the next Speaker of the House. At this stage, he's lost 18 votes, and they're only at R's in the alphabet, so maybe past halfway, but he may... It seems that he's losing more support than he had at this stage yesterday. CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion is watching this, listening, looking at who's voting for him and who isn't. Nikole, what do you make of this?
Yeah, well, this is pretty notable. I think probably the most interesting development in the last couple of minutes is you have at least one member voting for former House Speaker John Boehner, who, again, not even on the table here. And let's not forget that he was forced out in a different way many years ago. He ultimately stepped down, but there was an effort to try to remove him. So a little bit of irony there. But we are continuing to see many of these holdouts vote for not only former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, but also Majority Leader Steve Scalise. Once again, some members of the New York delegation casting their ballots for Lee Zeldin, a former member of Congress who ran for governor in New York State. And probably what's also most notable in terms of these votes is that you do have a couple of members who have switched. Members who supported Jordan yesterday on the first ballot, but have now changed their vote against him, including Congressman Vern Buchanan and Congressman Drew Ferguson. So those are some of the developments. Right now, of course, Jordan is up to 19 defectors. We know yesterday he lost 20, so he is getting very close to that margin. There were some members ahead of this vote that expressed some skepticism about whether or not he would be able to advance in this round, even suggesting that he may lose votes. So that is something we are watching closely as we keep an eye on this tally.
Wow. Nikole, just to give our viewers a sense of how far away John Boehner is from his former role, in the past few years, he's been promoting a cannabis company. You know, he is very far away from Washington politics and being Speaker of the House, and it really speaks to how uninterested some of these Republicans are in nominating Jim Jordan. Reading the tea leaves, seeing that he's losing, it seems like hemorrhaging support compared to yesterday. What is likely to happen next?
Yeah, well, we'll have to see as we continue to watch the numbers. So one little side note I do want to mention with respect to John Boehner is that he did put out a tweet last night, actually in response to our own Bob Costa, which with respect to this idea of having a Speaker pro tem, having that person extend their powers, having them to have some additional capabilities. You know, that is an idea that Boehner said he agrees with, and this was in response to another former Speaker, Newt Gingrich, also suggesting that members may need to move forward with empowering a Speaker pro tem to continue out the functions of governance in the House. Right now in that position is Congressman Patrick McHenry, who of course you see with the gavel right there in the House. But you know, this is potentially a next step that some members could take. There are a number of different proposals that have been floating around in recent days. Nothing that has yet been formally introduced, although that could come as soon as today. So it is another dynamic to watch if Jordan continues to lose support, and noting now that he has reached 20 defectors, the same number as yesterday. Again, we will see if that number continues to grow.
And as a reminder, back in January, it took 15 rounds to elect Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker, and I think Jim Jordan had said something like, look, this is only round 2, but it's, as Representative Tom Cole said, the job requires a spine of steel. Will he be able to continue to bring this vote to the floor while he's losing votes? Nikole Killion, thank you very much. Stand by. We'll be back with you shortly. At this point, though, I want to bring in Maura Gillespie and Joel Payne. Maura is the founder of the consulting business BlueStack Strategies. She previously served as an advisor to former Republican House Speaker John Boehner and former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and chief communications officer for the Political Action Committee Move On. Maura, I first just want to check with you. Is Boehner still in the weed business?
He is enjoying retirement and just came back from a lovely trip with his wife of celebrating 50 years of marriage. So he is not focused on returning to the speakership anytime soon. Okay,
a very official answer. Let me now get your reaction to what's happening on Capitol Hill. What's preventing Republicans from nominating, from supporting Jim Jordan?
For many of those members, they know Jim Jordan. And despite what was a very nice speech from Tom Cole today, they know that he is not someone who is willing to work with them. He has long been on his own agenda and focused narrowly on that, and really has not been a team player since the minute he got to Congress. So it doesn't surprise me that there are members who know his true colors and are unwilling to just fall in line to serve the interests of what the faction who did this wants. But I think what they're proposing, which is what they need to be doing right now, is giving Patrick McHenry the powers to do what needs to be done. Because again, we only have so much time left in this Congress, and a lot is at stake here. A lot is on the table for what needs to get done, especially for our allies around the world, but also for here at home for our own appropriations and financing.
Well, that's a good point, Joel. Let's speak about that more, because Democrats are actually pushing this plan to expand the powers of acting Speaker Patrick McHenry. Why might that be something they're pushing?
Democrats really just want to get on with the business of the American people. And I think that is the route that seems most likely right now to allow government to continue as it was designed to in a time where you've got two international conflicts that, the United States has significant investment in. You've got a government shutdown deadline rearing down on us again. I think Democrats are significantly concerned about the ability to actually do the work of the American people. And while Democrats certainly don't shed any tears for Republicans, having their comeuppance here in terms of kind of playing with their MAGA base and now the MAGA base kind of cannibalizing the mainstream of the party here, I do think that there is some concern with Democrats on the ability to actually do the work of the American people, because frankly, the failure to do that, I think, is in the aggregate, I think it ultimately does get shared by all of Congress, even if there is acute responsibility on part of Republicans. I think Democrats want to get the work done. One point really quickly, Earl, I just want to pick up on that I think Maura made that I think is a really good one, which is, Jim Jordan, so much of his time in Congress and so much of his value proposition is his ability to pressure from the outside, the ability to use the grassroots to leverage a position. And it seems ironic to me that in this moment, that's not the thing that presents the value. So much of the modern Republican Party, it's the incentive structure is flipped. And it's about how much can you turn up the heat on the base, turn up the heat in the grassroots, as opposed to can you actually govern and bring people together and unite. And that is not the Trump MAGA message of the last half decade or so. But Jim Jordan kind of finds himself on the short end of the straw here at a moment where those skill sets would have been really useful. It would have been really helpful for Jim Jordan to have relationships inside that chamber that he could tread on, as opposed to just being able to turn up the grassroots. And I do think that's instructive in a moment like this.
It's pretty eye-opening that Jim Jordan has not introduced a bill that's been signed into law since being elected in 2006. I mean, that says something. Maura, it was 8 right-wing House Republicans who moved to oust Kevin McCarthy because he worked with Democrats on things like the debt limit and other issues of the people. So from your point of view, either how many more rounds can Jim Jordan go through this, or who is the next viable candidate?
So I think Jim Jordan sort of built his kind of career on being a fighter and pushing, as Joel mentioned, pushing and putting pressure campaigns on things. But to what you said earlier, there isn't a real incentive to govern, and we're really missing that on the House floor. in Congress in general. So I think with regards to what Jim Jordan as a candidate, I do think the Republican Party needs to move on. Again, giving Patrick McHenry, who Democrats have agreed this is the next best decision to do, is to give him more power as a Speaker pro tem. That's where they need to go from here. But I do not think that Jim Jordan will become Speaker ever in this scenario. There are just some Republicans, both on the conservative side and the moderate side, who are not going to switch their votes by the looks of it. And support Jim Jordan for all the reasons we've already mentioned. But again, the Speaker of the House is an important role, and one that needs to look at the integrity of the institution, the entire institution. And that person is not Jim Jordan and will not be Jim Jordan. So they're going to have to look beyond him to hopefully Patrick McHenry and maybe, a couple others that could potentially get the vote. But right now in this moment, I can't see who that would be.
Wow. I mean, we're looking at the numbers now. I believe they've just finished the second round of voting. Yesterday, Jim Jordan was able to attract at least 200 votes. Today on the second ballot, it appears he's only reached 197. I think we might want to listen in here.
The reading clerk will now call the names of the members who did not answer the first call of the roll.
Payne. Jeffries. Sparks. Jordan.
All right, my thanks to Joel and Maura for walking us through what's the failed second round of voting for Jim Jordan as the next Speaker of the House. We'll continue to watch this as it comes out of Washington.